The rope was already around her neck when the truth decided to show up drunk, armed and wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. In the scorching heat of Red Rock's town square, 23-year-old Clara Whitfield stood on the gallows framed for a crime she didn't commit, while the real criminal sat in the judge's chair. But sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected forms. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below which town you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this tale of corruption and redemption has traveled. The morning sun cast long shadows across Red Rock's dusty square, transforming the gallows into a dark cross against the amber earth. Clara Whitfield's wrists burned where the rough rope cut into her skin, but she kept her chin raised, refusing to give Judge Mortimer Graves the satisfaction of seeing her break. At 23, she had survived orphanhood poverty and the harsh realities of frontier life. She would not crumble now, not even with death's cold breath on her neck. Clara Elizabeth Whitfield. Judge Graves's voice boomed across the square, each word deliberate and heavy with false authority. He stood before the gathered crowd in his black robes, the morning light catching the silver threads in his perfectly groomed beard. You stand convicted of theft against the household of this court. The stolen item, my wife's emerald necklace, a family heirloom worth more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes of your simple needlework. The crowd shifted uneasily. Nearly 200 souls had gathered in the square, their faces a mixture of sympathy, fear, and morbid curiosity. Clara recognized most of them Mrs. Henderson from the general store who had taught her to read when she was 12, Tom Bailey the blacksmith whose shirts she mended every month, young Sarah Mitchell, barely 16, who came to Clara to learn embroidery. They all knew her. They all knew she was innocent. But knowing and speaking were two different things in Red Rock. Your Honor. Clara's voice cracked her throat dry as the desert wind. I've told you the truth. I never touched that necklace. I was in Mrs. Graves's chamber to deliver the dress she commissioned, nothing more. I saw... Silence. Judge Graves struck his gavel against the portable podium they'd set up beside the gallows. The evidence was found in your quarters. My wife Victoria saw you admiring it with covetous eyes. Your guilt has been established before this court and by a jury of your peers. Clara almost laughed at that. A jury of her peers. The 12 men who'd condemned her were all either in debt to Judge Graves or terrified of him. Samuel Morrison owed the judge 3 years of back taxes that mysteriously disappeared after the guilty verdict. Peter Dalton's son had been caught rustling cattle but received only a warning after Peter voted to convict. The others had their own reasons, their own fears. Mrs. Graves, Clara called out, desperately spotting the judge's wife in the crowd. Victoria Graves stood like a porcelain statue, her face pale beneath her black lace parasol, her emerald green dress a cruel reminder of the necklace Clara was accused of stealing. Please tell them the truth. You know I didn't... Victoria's eyes flickered with something guilt, perhaps, or fear, but she turned away, her gloved hand clutching her husband's arm. Enough of this theatrical display, Judge Graves declared. Sheriff Colton, proceed with the sentence. Sheriff James Colton, a man who'd once been decent before Graves arrived in town 3 years ago, climbed the gallows steps with heavy feet. His badge caught the sunlight, but there was no shine in his eyes as he approached Clara. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, liquid courage to do what he knew was wrong. Any last words, Miss Whitfield? Colton asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Clara looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people she'd served, helped, and befriended over her 5 years in Red Rock. Her small seamstress shop had been more than a business. It had been a gathering place for the town's women, a safe haven where they could speak freely while she worked her needle through fabric. She'd mended their clothes and sometimes their spirits. She'd kept their secrets celebrated, their joys, mourned their losses. I forgive you all, she said, her voice carrying across the silent square. Every one of you who knows the truth but stays silent. Every one of you who values your comfort over justice. I forgive you and I pity you because you'll have to live with this. When you wear the clothes I mended, when you see the empty shop where I used to work, when you pass the garden where I grew those sunflowers you all admired, remember that you let an innocent woman die because you were afraid of one man. Several women in the crowd began to weep. Men shuffled their feet and avoided eye contact. But still no one spoke up. Judge Graves's face reddened. Enough, Sheriff, the lever, if you please. Colton moved toward the lever that would drop the trap door beneath Clara's feet. His hand trembled as he reached for it. Clara closed her eyes, thinking of her parents dead these 15 years from scarlet fever. Perhaps she would see them soon. Perhaps there was justice somewhere beyond this dusty, corrupted town. The crowd held its breath. A baby cried somewhere in the back, quickly hushed by its mother. A dog barked in the distance. The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the square. And then cutting through the silence like a rusty blade came the sound of spurs, slow, deliberate. Each step marked by the distinctive jingle of silver against silver. Clara opened her eyes. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a path from the saloon to the gallows. Through that path walked a man who looked like he'd been intimate with the wrong end of a whiskey bottle for the better part of a week. His clothes were dusty and torn, his face unshaven, his dark hair hanging in greasy strands beneath a battered hat. He moved with the exaggerated care of the deeply intoxicated, one hand on his gun belt for balance. "Well, well, well," the stranger drawled, his voice rough as sandpaper. "A hanging, how festive. And here I thought this town's only entertainment was watching tumbleweeds race." Judge Graves's eyes narrowed. "This is a legal proceeding, stranger. Move along or find yourself in contempt of court." The man laughed, a bitter, broken sound that sent chills down Clara's spine despite the morning heat. "Contempt? Oh, Judge, I've got nothing but contempt, but it ain't for your court. It's for men who hide behind titles they haven't earned and authority they've stolen." He stumbled up the gallows steps, and Sheriff Colton moved to intercept him. "That's far enough, friend. You're drunk. Sleep it off in the jail or move on." "Friend." The stranger's bloodshot eyes fixed on Colton with surprising intensity. "We ain't friends, Sheriff. A friend wouldn't let an innocent girl swing for a crime she didn't commit. A friend would have a backbone instead of whiskey for breakfast." Colton's hand moved to his gun. "I said that's enough." "No," the stranger said, swaying slightly but standing his ground. "It ain't nearly enough, not by half." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying despite his apparent intoxication. "You all know this girl, don't you, Clara Whitfield? Been here 5 years. Mended your clothes, listened to your troubles, never asked for more than fair payment for honest work. Any of you really believe she'd throw it all away for some jewels?" "The evidence," Judge Graves began. "The evidence was planted, the stranger interrupted, turning to face the judge. "Just like you planted evidence on Marcus Webb when he wouldn't sell you his land. Just like you planted evidence on the Chinese family that ran the laundry before you burned them out. Oh yes, Judge, I know all about your methods." The crowd murmured. These were things whispered in private but never spoken aloud. Marcus Webb had been found with stolen cattle on his property and forced to flee. The Chang family's laundry had burned down after they were accused of opium dealing, though everyone knew they were decent people. "Who are you?" Judge Graves demanded, his composure cracking slightly. "What's your business here?" The stranger reached into his coat and a dozen hands went to their guns. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a badge. Tarnished, battered, but unmistakably real. "Elias Kane," he said, his voice suddenly steadier. "Deputy U.S. Marshal. And my business, Judge Graves, or should I say Henry Blackwell, is you." The square erupted. People pushed forward, straining to see. Judge Graves' face went from red to white in the span of a heartbeat. "That's absurd," Graves sputtered. "I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "No game," Elias said, pulling a worn wanted poster from his pocket. "Henry Blackwell. Wanted for embezzlement of federal funds fraud and suspected murder. Disappeared from Kansas City 3 years ago with $40,000 in government money. Set yourself up real nice here in Red Rock, didn't you? New name, new life, even got yourself elected judge. Must have been expensive buying all that respectability." "This is preposterous," Victoria Graves shrieked. "Mortimer, tell them this is a mistake." But Clara, even with the noose around her neck, could see the truth in Judge Graves's eyes. The fear, the recognition, the cornered animal looking for escape. "You've been hunting me for 3 years, Graves asked quietly, his public persona crumbling. "Every damn day," Elias replied. "Through 7 states and more dusty towns than I care to count. You're good at running, Henry, good at covering your tracks. But you made one mistake." "And what was that?" Elias smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "You got comfortable. You got greedy. And you started doing here what you did in Kansas City, using your position to steal, to intimidate, to destroy anyone who stood in your way. Clara here was just the latest in a long line of victims. You can't prove anything, Graves said, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't I? Elias reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something that caught the morning light like green fire. An emerald necklace. The emerald necklace. The crowd gasped. Victoria Graves swayed on her feet. Found this buried in your garden, Judge, Elias said conversationally. Not very deep, almost like someone wanted it found, but not too easily. Just deep enough to make it look like someone else hid it there. Tell me, when did you dig it up and plant it in Clara's room last night? This morning before dawn. That's impossible, Victoria stammered. The necklace was in her room. We found it there. No, ma'am, Elias said, not unkindly. What you found was paste. A good copy, I'll grant you, but paste nonetheless. Your husband had the real one buried to retrieve later, probably planning to sell it once the attention died down. Once Clara was dead and couldn't protest her innocence anymore. Clara felt her knees weaken. She'd known she was innocent, but to have proof, to have someone finally speak the truth. You're lying, Judge Graves snarled, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Am I? Elias asked. Then you won't mind if we have the banker Mr. Hoffman examine both necklaces. He's got a jeweler's loop in his office, doesn't he? Should be easy enough to tell real emeralds from glass. Theodore Hoffman, the elderly banker, stepped forward from the crowd. I can do that, yes. I have the tools. No need, Victoria Graves said suddenly, her voice strange and distant. The marshal is right. Everyone turned to stare at her. She stood straight now, her parasol-forgotten tears streaming down her carefully powdered face. Victoria, what are you doing? Her husband hissed. I'm done, Mortimer, or Henry, or whoever you really are. She turned to address the crowd, her voice growing stronger. The necklace in Clara's room is fake. I know because I helped put it there. God forgive me, I helped frame an innocent woman. The square exploded into chaos. People shouted, pushed, demanded answers. Sheriff Colton looked lost, his hand frozen on the lever that would have ended Clara's life. Judge Graves. Henry Blackwell stood perfectly still, his empire crumbling around him. Why? Clara asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Mrs. Graves. Why? Victoria met her eyes, and Clara saw years of pain there. Because he made me. Because he said if I didn't, he'd tell everyone about Samuel. Samuel, someone in the crowd asked. My son, Victoria whispered. From my first marriage. He's simple-minded, has been since birth. Mortimer found out somehow. He said if I didn't help him, he'd have Samuel committed to an asylum. Have you seen those places? They're worse than death, so I helped him. I helped him frame you, Clara, and God knows who else. I'm so sorry. This is ridiculous, Graves said, trying to regain control. My wife is clearly distressed. She doesn't know what she's saying. Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying, Victoria shot back, her fear transforming into fury. I know about Kansas City, Henry. I know about the missing money. I know about your first wife. Oh, yes, the one you told me died. She's alive, living with her sister in Boston. You're a bigamist on top of everything else. The judge's hand went for his gun, but Elias was faster, despite his apparent intoxication. In one smooth motion, he drew his Colt .45 and pointed it at Graves's chest. I wouldn't, he said mildly. See, the thing about pretending to be drunk is that people underestimate you. They don't notice you're actually stone-cold sober and have been for the past 3 days while you gathered evidence. Clara would have laughed if she hadn't had a noose around her neck. The stumbling, the slurred words, it had all been an act. Sheriff Colton, Elias said, never taking his eyes off Graves. You want to do your actual job for once and arrest this man? Or do I need to handle this myself? Colton looked around at the crowd, at the faces of his neighbors, at Clara standing on the gallows. Something shifted in his expression, shame, perhaps, or the remembrance of the decent man he'd once been. Judge Mortimer Graves, he said formally, or Henry Blackwell, or whoever you are, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Deputy Marshal Kane, I'll need you to validate these charges with federal authority. Happy to oblige, Elias said. But first, how about we get that rope off Miss Whitfield's neck? Seems like she's been wearing it long enough. Colton climbed the gallows steps quickly, his hands gentler now as he removed the noose from Clara's neck. She gasped, breathing freely for the first time since she'd climbed those steps. Her legs gave out, and Colton caught her supporting her weight as he cut the ropes binding her wrists. "I'm sorry, Clarence," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry. I knew you were innocent, but I was afraid. We all were." "I know," Clara said quietly. "I meant what I said. I forgive you. But Sheriff, don't ever let fear make you a coward again." He nodded, shame etched deep in his weathered face. Meanwhile, Judge Graves had recovered some of his composure. "This is a mistake," he said loudly. "I have powerful friends. You can't simply—" "Your powerful friends in Kansas City," Elias interrupted. "The ones you stole from, they're the ones who hired me to find you Henry. They want their money back, with interest." "The money's gone," Graves said desperately. "Invested in this town and building my life here." "In buying people's silence and compliance," Clara said, finding her voice as she stood on shaking legs. "How much did you pay to get elected judge? How much to keep the sheriff in line? How much to destroy anyone who questioned you?" She walked down the gallows steps slowly, deliberately, each footfall echoing in the silent square. The crowd parted for her as they had for Elias, but now with respect rather than curiosity. She stopped directly in front of Graves, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. "You nearly killed me for a necklace," she said. "But that wasn't really why, was it?" "It was because I saw too much. Because Victoria confided in me when I was fitting her dresses. Because she told me things about you that you didn't want anyone to know." "You're nothing," Graves spat. "A seamstress. A nobody. Who would believe you over me?" "Everyone," Elias said simply. "Once they see the evidence I've collected. The forged documents you used to claim the Webb property after Marcus fled. The testimonies from the Chang family who are alive and well, in Sacramento, by the way. The real Judge Mortimer Graves' death certificate, yes. Henry, I know you stole a dead man's identity. His widow was very helpful once I tracked her down." The crowd was pressing closer now, their fear transforming into anger. These were people who had suffered under Graves's rule, who had lost property, dignity, and hope. The revelation of his true identity had broken the spell of his authority. "We should hang him," someone shouted from the crowd. "Use the rope he meant for Clara, so String him up," another voice called. "Let him know how it feels." The mob mentality was building, the crowd's anger feeding on itself. Clara could feel the violence brewing, the desire for immediate vengeance. She understood it, God, how she understood it, but she also knew it would solve nothing. "No," she said loudly, her voice carrying over the growing tumult. Everyone turned to look at her. "No," she repeated. "We're not going to become him. We're not going to let lawlessness answer lawlessness. He'll face trial, a real trial with real justice. That's what separates us from men like him." "The girl's right," Elias said, holstering his weapon, but keeping a watchful eye on Graves. "He'll be tried in federal court. And trust me, they've got a special interest in making an example of him. The government doesn't like it when someone steals their money." "But what about what he's done here, Tom Bailey?" The blacksmith stepped forward. "What about the families he's destroyed, the people he's driven out?" "That'll be part of it," Elias assured him. "Every crime, every victim. It'll all come out in court, and when it does, Henry here will wish he'd taken his chances with a mob." Judge Graves. Henry Blackwell seemed to shrink before their eyes. The imposing figure who had ruled Red Rock through fear was revealed as nothing more than a desperate criminal whose luck had finally run out. "Victoria," he said, turning to his wife. "Please, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them—" "I'll tell them the truth," Victoria said coldly. "Every bit of it, in court under oath. It's the least I can do after what I've been part of." She turned to Clara, falling to her knees in the dust. "Can you ever forgive me? I nearly let you die. I was so afraid, so weak." Clara helped her to her feet, seeing not the judge's wife, but a woman who had been trapped in her own kind of noose. "You spoke up when it mattered most," she said. "That took courage. We all have to live with our choices, Mrs. Graves, but yours today saved my life." The sun had climbed higher during the confrontation, and the morning shadows had shortened. The gallows still stood, but it no longer seemed as imposing. It was just wood and rope given power only by the fear of those who stood in its shadow. "Sheriff Colton," Elias said, "I believe you have a jail cell available." Colton nodded, approaching Graves with iron shackles. "Henry Blackwell, you're under arrest. You'll be held until the federal marshals arrive to transport you for trial." As Colton locked the shackles around Blackwell's wrists, the former judge made one last desperate play. "I have money hidden," he said quickly. "Enough to make everyone rich. Just let me go and I'll tell you where—" "The money you stole?" Elias asked dryly. "Already found it. 3,000 in gold coins in your basement, another 5,000 in bills hidden in your office walls. It'll be returned to its rightful owners minus what you spent on your charade here." Blackwell's last hope died in his eyes. He allowed Colton to lead him away. His head bowed his steps, shuffling like a man twice his age. As they passed Clara, he stopped for a moment. "You should have just taken the blame," he said quietly. "It would have been easier for everyone." "Easier for you," Clara corrected. "But I've learned something, Mr. Blackwell. The easy path and the right path are rarely the same. I'd rather die with my integrity intact than live as a coward." He had no response to that. Colton pulled him along and the crowd followed, wanting to see the tyrant locked in his own jail. But Clara stayed by the gallows, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was fading, and the reality of how close she'd come to death was setting in. Elias Kane stood beside her, no longer playing the drunk. Up close she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with intelligent brown eyes and the weathered look of a man who'd spent years on the trail. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life." "You saved your own life," he replied, "by being the kind of person others wanted to save. If you'd been guilty, if you'd been like him, the town would have let you hang without a second thought. But you weren't, and they knew it, even if they were too afraid to act on it." "Fear's a powerful thing," Clara said, rubbing her neck where the rope had left marks. "So is courage," Elias countered, "and you showed plenty of it up there. Not many people could stand on a gallows and forgive their would-be executioners." Clara looked out at the square, now nearly empty except for a few stragglers. "What happens now?" Now your town has to figure out how to function without a corrupt judge running things. They'll need to elect a new one, a real one this time. They'll need to undo the damage Blackwell caused, restore property to rightful owners, bring back the families he drove out, if they're willing to return. "And you?" Elias shrugged. "I'll stay until the federal marshals arrive to collect Blackwell. Make sure he doesn't try to escape or convince someone to let him go. After that," he looked toward the horizon, "there's always another criminal to catch another wrong to right." "Sounds lonely," Clara observed. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's necessary work. Men like Blackwell, they're like a disease. They infect everything they touch, spread corruption wherever they go. Someone has to stop them." "Well, Deputy Marshal Kane," Clara said, extending her hand, "if you're staying in town for a few days, you'll need somewhere to sleep besides the saloon. I have a room above my shop. It's small, but it's clean and quiet. Consider it a thank you for saving my life." He shook her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "That's kind of you, Miss Whitfield, but I should warn you, people might talk. Unmarried woman hosting a stranger and all." Clara laughed the first real laugh she'd had in weeks. "Mr. Kane, they were about to hang me this morning. I think my reputation can survive offering hospitality to the man who prevented it." As they walked away from the gallows, Clara noticed something. The townspeople who remained were already starting to dismantle the wooden structure. Without anyone ordering them to, without any formal decision, they were taking it apart board by board. "Looks like Red Rock is ready for a change," Elias observed. "It's been ready for a while," Claire replied. "We just needed someone to show us it was possible. You did that." "No, Miss Whitfield," he said thoughtfully. "I just provided an opportunity. The town chose to take it. That's what matters." They walked through the dusty streets as the sun climbed toward noon. The seamstress shop stood where Clara had left it, the windows dusty but unbroken, her small garden of sunflowers still reaching toward the light. She'd thought she'd never see it again. As she unlocked the door, she heard footsteps behind them. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stood there with a basket of food, and behind her Sarah Mitchell with an armful of fresh flowers. "We thought you might be hungry," Mrs. Henderson said awkwardly, "and Sarah picked these for you this morning before everything." "We're sorry, Clara," Sarah added, tears in her eyes. "We should have spoken up. We should have—" "What's done is done," Clara interrupted gently. "What matters is what we do next. This town needs to heal, and that won't happen if we hold on to anger and blame." More people appeared as word spread that Clara was at her shop. They brought food, flowers, small gifts, tokens of apology and relief. Within an hour, her small home was filled with neighbors who had been too afraid to stand with her, but were brave enough to stand with her now. Elias watched it all from a corner, saying little, but observing everything. This was how a town began to heal, he thought. Not through grand gestures or official proclamations, but through small acts of kindness and courage. As the afternoon wore on, stories began to emerge. People who had been wronged by Blackwell felt safe enough to speak. Tom Bailey talked about the taxes he'd been forced to pay to keep his smithy. Mrs. Patterson revealed that Blackwell had threatened to declare her husband insane and seize their property if they didn't vote his way. The Woodward family admitted they'd been planning to leave town rather than live under his rule any longer. Each story added another stone to the mountain of evidence against Henry Blackwell. But more importantly, each story told was a step toward reclaiming Red Rock from the shadow of fear he'd cast over it. As the sun began to set, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Sheriff Colton appeared at Clara's door. He looked older than he had that morning, worn down by the weight of his choices. "Miss Whitfield," he said, hat in hand, "I wanted to, that is, I need to—" He stopped, struggling for words. "What is it, Sheriff?" Clara asked, though not unkindly. "I'm resigning," he said simply. "After today, after what I almost did, I don't deserve to wear this badge. The town needs a sheriff who'll protect them, not enable tyrants like Blackwell." "The town needs a sheriff who's learned from his mistakes," Elias said, speaking up for the first time in hours. "A man who knows the cost of corruption and won't let it happen again." Colton shook his head. "I don't deserve—" "None of us deserve forgiveness," Clara interrupted, "but we offer it anyway because that's how we move forward. Sheriff, you made terrible choices, but you also made the right choice when it mattered most. Don't run from your responsibility now." "The town will decide," Colton said. "There'll need to be an election, a real one this time. If they want me gone, I'll go." "Fair enough," Elias agreed. "But until then, you've got a job to do. Blackwell needs to be watched, and this town needs law and order while it rebuilds." Colton nodded slowly, some of his dignity returning. "I'll do my duty. I owe the town that much." As he left, Clara turned to Elias. "Do you think he'll make a good sheriff?" "I think he'll make a careful one," Elias replied. "And sometimes that's better than good. A man who's felt the weight of his failures isn't likely to repeat them." That evening, as the first stars appeared in the desert sky, Clara stood in her garden among the sunflowers. The events of the day felt surreal, like something from a dime novel rather than real life. She'd started the morning with a noose around her neck and ended it surrounded by apologetic neighbors and newfound hope. "Quite a day," Elias said, joining her in the garden. "The longest of my life," Clara admitted. "This morning feels like a year ago." "What will you do now?" Clara considered the question. "What I've always done, I suppose. Sew, mend, listen. But maybe also speak up more. Stand up more. I learned today that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of crime. A hard lesson. The best ones usually are." She paused, then asked, "What about Blackwell's wife, Victoria?" "What will happen to her?" "That depends," Elias said carefully, "on what she knew when she knew it, and what she did about it. She was a victim, but she was also complicit. The law will have to sort that out. And her son Samuel, he'll be cared for. There are places, good places, where people like him can live with dignity. Not the asylums Blackwell threatened her with, but real homes. I'll make sure of it." Clara nodded, relieved. Victoria had done wrong, but she'd been trapped by her own fears and her love for her son. It was hard to judge her too harshly. As they stood there in the gathering darkness, the sound of hammering echoed through the town. Clara looked toward the square and saw torches burning. The townspeople were still dismantling the gallows, working into the night to remove the symbol of Blackwell's reign. "They're not wasting any time," Elias observed. "Good," Clara said firmly. "The sooner it's gone, the sooner we can start forgetting this day." "You don't want to remember it." Clara touched her neck, feeling the rope burns that would likely scar. "I'll remember it every time I look in a mirror. But the town needs to remember the lesson, not the fear. We need to remember that we stood up to tyranny eventually, that we chose justice eventually, that we found our courage eventually." "Eventually is better than never," Elias said philosophically. "Yes," Clara agreed. "It is." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the town beginning to heal itself. Then Clara asked, "How long have you really been in Red Rock?" Elias smiled slightly. 3 days. "I've been watching, listening, gathering evidence. I knew Blackwell was here, tracked him through 3 aliases before I found him, but I needed proof, and I needed the right moment. And my execution was the right moment. Your courage was the right moment," he corrected. "When you stood on that gallows and forgave the town instead of cursing it, you gave them permission to be better than they'd been. That's when I knew they were ready to hear the truth. You risked a lot on that gamble." "Not really. I would have stopped the execution either way. But doing it this way with the town ready to listen, that meant Blackwell's whole house of cards would collapse, not just one piece of it." Clara studied him in the dim light. "You're not really a drunk, you're not really reckless, and you're certainly not really simple. Who are you, Elias Kane?" "Just a man doing a job," he said. "Nothing more, nothing less." "I don't believe that." Then believe this: I'm someone who knows what it's like to see injustice and be unable to stop it. I became a marshal, so I'd never have to feel that helpless again." There was a story there Clara could tell, but she didn't push. Everyone had their secrets, their pains that drove them. She'd learned that from years of listening to the women who came to her shop. A knock at the garden gate interrupted her thoughts. Tom Bailey stood there with several other men from town. "Miss Clara," he said respectfully, "we've been talking and we want to make things right. Blackwell took your savings when he had you arrested, claimed it was for court costs. We're taking up a collection to replace it and more besides. It's not enough, we know, but it's a start," Clara said, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Tom. All of you." "There's more," Tom continued. "We want you to speak at the town meeting tomorrow. Help us figure out how to move forward. You've got a voice people trust, Clara. We need that now." Clara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but it was different from the weight of the rope. This was something she could bear. "I'll be there," she promised. As the men left, Elias chuckled softly. From condemned criminal to town leader in 1 day. That might be a record. "It's not about leading," Clara said. "It's about helping the town find its way back to what it should be. We were a good place once before Blackwell came. We can be again. With the right people guiding it. With all of us working together," Clara corrected. "No more letting one person have all the power. That's how we got into this mess." The night deepened and the hammering from the square finally stopped. The gallows were gone, reduced to lumber that would be used for building something better. Clara hoped it would be something that represented life rather than death growth, rather than fear. "I should check on Blackwell," Elias said eventually. "Make sure he's secure for the night. Will you come back?" "If you'll have me. That offer of a room still stands." "It does. You'll find it at the top of the stairs, second door on the right. I'll leave a lamp burning." As he left, Clara remained in her garden, surrounded by her sunflowers. They were resilient plants, always turning toward the light, no matter how dark things got. She'd planted them her first week in Red Rock when she was young and alone and afraid. They'd survived drought storms and neglect, always coming back stronger, just like the town would, just like she would. The stars were fully out now, brilliant in the clear desert sky. Clara had read once that some of those stars were already dead, their light taking so long to reach Earth that they'd burned out before humans ever saw them shine. But their light persisted, crossing impossible distances to illuminate the darkness. Maybe that's what courage was, a light that persisted even after the source seemed gone. The people of Red Rock had found their courage today late, perhaps, but not too late. And that light would continue guiding them through whatever came next. Clara touched the rope burns on her neck one more time, then went inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to rebuild. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she would sleep peacefully, knowing that justice had prevailed and that Red Rock was free. The seamstress who had stood on the gallows that morning had been transformed by the day's events, but not broken. If anything, she was stronger, tempered by the fire of near death, and reborn in the light of truth. Clara Whitfield had faced the worst that men like Henry Blackwell could do, and she had survived. More than survived, she had triumphed. And in that triumph, a whole town had found its redemption. The morning after Clara's near execution dawned gray and uncertain, with clouds gathering on the horizon like witnesses to yesterday's drama. Elias Kane stood at the window of the small room above the seamstress shop, watching the town wake up to its new reality. Below, people moved through the streets differently, some with purpose, others with the hesitant steps of those who weren't quite sure what came next, when the fear that had governed them for 3 years was suddenly gone. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Clara stood in the hallway, already dressed for the day, though the high collar of her dress couldn't quite hide the rope burns on her neck. "There's been a development," she said without preamble. "Victoria Graves tried to kill herself last night." Elias was moving before she finished the sentence, strapping on his gun belt as they hurried down the stairs. "Is she alive?" "Barely. Doc Morrison has her at his place. She took laudanum enough to kill a horse, but her maid found her in time." Clara's voice was steady, but Elias could see the tension in her shoulders. "She left a letter." They walked quickly through the early morning streets, passing the empty space where the gallows had stood just yesterday. Someone had planted a small American flag in the dirt there, a symbol of the federal justice that had finally reached their town. Doc Morrison's house sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story building that served as both his residence and Red Rock's only medical facility. The doctor himself met them at the door, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from a sleepless night. "She's stable," he said without preamble, leading them inside. "But it was close. Another hour, and we'd have lost her." "The letter?" Elias asked. Morrison handed him an envelope, Clara's name written across it in shaky handwriting. "She insisted it go to Miss Whitfield first. Said she had no right to ask, but hoped you'd read it anyway." Clara took the envelope with steady hands, though Elias noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she broke the seal. Her eyes moved across the pages, there were several, and her expression shifted from wariness to surprise to something approaching pity. "She's confessed everything," Clara said quietly. "Not just about framing me, but about all of it. Every crime her husband committed, every person he destroyed, every bribe he paid or received, names, dates, amounts, it's all here." "Why?" Elias asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Guilt," Clara replied, still reading, "and fear. She says she can't face the trial, can't face the town knowing what she's done. But she wanted the truth recorded before—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "May I—" Elias held out his hand for the letter. Clara passed it to him, and he scanned it quickly with a lawman's eye for detail. It was indeed comprehensive, a full accounting of Henry Blackwell's crimes and Victoria's complicity in them. More than enough to ensure conviction, even if Victoria herself couldn't testify. "There's something else," Doc Morrison said. "She keeps asking for you, Miss Whitfield. Says she won't speak to anyone else." Clara's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation." "You don't have to go," Elias said. "You don't owe her anything." "No," Clara disagreed. "I don't. But maybe this isn't about what I owe. Maybe it's about who I choose to be." She moved toward the stairs leading to the patient rooms, then paused. "Will you come with me? I'd rather not do this alone." Elias nodded, and they climbed the stairs together. Victoria Graves lay in the furthest room, her face pale as the white sheets that covered her. Her eyes were closed, but they fluttered open when she heard footsteps. "Clara, she whispered, her voice raw. "You came." "I came," Clara confirmed, pulling a chair close to the bed, but not too close. "Though I'm not sure why." "Because you're decent," Victoria said with a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Unlike the rest of us." Decency didn't stop you from nearly getting me killed, Clara pointed out, her voice carefully neutral. No, it didn't. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I've been a coward all my life, Clara. When my first husband died, I thought Henry Mortimer, whoever he was, I thought he was my salvation, a successful man, powerful, who wanted to take care of me and Samuel. I didn't ask questions about his past. I didn't want to know. But you found out anyway, Elias said from his position by the door. Victoria nodded weakly. Piece by piece. Little things that didn't add up. Documents I wasn't supposed to see, and by then it was too late. I was trapped. He had Samuel to hold over me, and he knew it. You had choices, Clara said, not unkindly, but firmly. We all have choices. Yes, Victoria agreed, and I made the wrong ones every time. Out of fear, out of weakness, out of a desperate need to protect my son. But those were still my choices, and I'll carry them to my grave, which might be sooner than anyone expected. Doc Morrison cleared his throat from the doorway. She's not going to die not from this anyway. But there will be consequences. Legal ones. I know, Victoria said. That's why I wrote the letter. It's my testimony in case I can't give it in person. Running away again, Clara observed, and there was an edge to her voice now. Even now you're trying to escape the consequences. Victoria flinched as if slapped. You're right. God help me, you're right. I've been running my whole life, from responsibility, from truth, from myself. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Finally, Clara spoke again. Your son Samuel, what will happen to him? My sister in Philadelphia has agreed to take him, Victoria said, some life returning to her voice. She has a good home, a kind husband. Samuel will be safe there away from all this scandal. That's good, Clara said, and she meant it. He doesn't deserve to suffer for your choices or his stepfather's crimes. None of the innocent people Henry hurt deserve to suffer, Victoria said. The Chang family, Marcus Webb, none of you deserved what we did to you. No, Clara agreed. We didn't. Victoria struggled to sit up, her hands shaking. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know what I did is unforgivable. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly desperately sorry. Clara stood up, smoothing her skirts. I said yesterday that I forgive the town, and I meant it. That includes you, Mrs. Graves. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean there aren't consequences. You'll have to live with what you've done, just as I'll have to live with these scars on my neck. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. But living is the important part, Mrs. Graves. Don't try to take the easy way out again. Face what you've done, accept the consequences, and maybe someday you can start to make amends. As they left the doctor's house, Elias noticed a crowd gathering at the town hall. Looks like the meeting's starting early, he observed. People are eager to move forward, Clara said. Can't say I blame them. The town hall was packed to overflowing with people spilling out onto the street. Inside, Tom Bailey had taken temporary charge as blacksmith's voice carrying over the crowd's murmur. Folks, we need to make some decisions, he was saying as Clara and Elias entered. We've got no judge or sheriff who's offered to resign, and a town government that's been corrupt for 3 years. We need to figure out how to fix this mess. Let Clara speak, someone shouted from the back, and the cry was taken up by others. Clara, Clara! She hadn't expected this to go from condemned criminal to the town's voice in less than a day. But she understood why they needed her. She was the visible symbol of their collective guilt and their potential redemption. Clara made her way to the front of the room, Elias staying close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough back to let her have this moment. She stood at the podium where just yesterday Judge Graves Henry Blackwell had condemned her to death. I'm not a leader, she began, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. I'm not a politician or a lawyer or anyone special. I'm just a seamstress who was nearly killed for a crime I didn't commit. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but she continued. But maybe that's what we need right now, ordinary people willing to speak the truth and do what's right. For too long we've let fear govern us. We've let one man's corruption poison our entire town. That ends now. What do we do? Mrs. Henderson asked from the front row. How do we fix this? We start by acknowledging what went wrong, Clara said. We allowed ourselves to be bought, intimidated, and silenced. We saw injustice and looked away because it was easier, safer. We all bear some responsibility for what happened. But we were afraid, someone protested. Yes, Clara agreed. We were afraid. But fear is not an excuse for abandoning our principles. Fear is what tyrants count on. It's their greatest weapon. Sheriff Colton stood up from where he'd been sitting in the corner. I've been the worst of all, he said, his voice heavy with shame. I had the power to stop him, the responsibility to protect you all, and I failed. I let fear and whiskey make me a coward. You did, Clara said bluntly, and Colton flinched. But you also made the right choice when it mattered most. The question now is, what will you do next? Whatever the town decides, Colton said. If you want me gone, I'll go. If you'll have me, I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends. We need a vote, Tom Bailey said, all in favor of Sheriff Colton keeping his position. About half the room raised their hands. All opposed. The other half raised theirs. We're split, Tom observed unnecessarily. Then let me say something. Elias spoke up, his marshal's authority carrying weight. I've seen a lot of lawmen in my time. Good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. Sheriff Colton made mistakes, serious ones. But a man who's learned from his failures, who knows the cost of corruption firsthand, that man might just make the most vigilant sheriff you could ask for. Or he might fall back into old habits, someone countered. He might, Elias agreed. But that's true of anyone you elect. The difference is Colton's already been tested and found wanting. He knows what that feels like. Do you really think he'd risk feeling that shame again? Clara watched Colton during this exchange. The man looked older than his years, worn down by guilt and alcohol, but there was something else in his eyes now, determination perhaps, or hope for redemption. I propose a compromise, she said. Sheriff Colton keeps his position for 6 months provisional. No drinking, complete transparency in all his dealings, and regular reports to a town council. At the end of 6 months, we vote again. If he's proven himself, he stays. If not, we find someone else. And who's on this town council? Someone asked. People we elect, Clara said. Real elections, not the shams Blackwell orchestrated. 7 members from different parts of town, different professions. No one person with too much power. The crowd murmured, discussing this among themselves. Finally, Tom Bailey called for a vote on Clara's proposal, and it passed by a significant margin. Now, Clara continued, we need to talk about restitution. Blackwell stole from many of us directly or indirectly. Deputy Marshal Kane has recovered some of the money. How do we distribute it fairly? This sparked a heated debate. Everyone had suffered under Blackwell's rule, but some had lost more than others. The Webb family had lost their entire ranch. The Chang family had lost their business and been driven from town. Others had paid illegal taxes or fines that had gone straight into Blackwell's pockets. We need a committee, suggested Theodore Hoffman, the banker. People to review claims, investigate losses, and recommend fair compensation. And you want to head this committee, I suppose, someone said suspiciously. Trust was in short supply in Red Rock. Actually, Hoffman said, I think Clara should head it. She's the one person we all know was truly victimized, and she has shown she can be fair even to those who wronged her. Clara wanted to refuse. She'd already been thrust into more leadership than she'd ever wanted. But looking at the faces around her, hopeful, desperate, ashamed, determined, she knew she couldn't walk away. I'll do it, she said, but not alone. I want 6 others, including someone to represent the families who were driven out of town. We need to bring them back if they're willing to come and make restitution for what they lost. The Changs won't come back, someone said, not after what we did to them. Have we asked them? Clara challenged. Have we apologized? Have we offered to make it right? Silence answered her. Then that's where we start, she said firmly. We write to every family Blackwell drove away. We tell them the truth about what happened, we apologize for our complicity, and we invite them home. Whether they come or not is their choice, but we have to try. The meeting continued for hours, hammering out details of governance, restitution, and rebuilding. It was messy with arguments and disagreements, but it was real, the first honest town meeting Red Rock had seen in 3 years. As the sun reached its zenith, a commotion outside interrupted the proceedings. Through the windows, they could see a cloud of dust approaching from the East Riders, at least a dozen of them. Federal marshals, Elias said, recognizing the formation. They're here for Blackwell. The meeting adjourned as everyone poured outside to watch. The marshals were led by a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She dismounted in front of the sheriff's office and looked around at the gathered crowd. "I'm Chief Marshal Ruth Hawkins," she announced. "I'm here for Henry Blackwell, also known as Mortimer Graves." "He's in the jail, ma'am," Sheriff Colton said, approaching with the keys. "Been there since yesterday." Marshal Hawkins studied him with those sharp eyes. "You're the sheriff who almost let an innocent woman hang?" Colton's face reddened, but he met her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. To my eternal shame." "At least you own it," she said. "That's more than most would do." She turned to Elias. "Deputy Kane, good work finding him. The boys in Kansas City will be pleased to get their money back." "Not all of it's coming back," Elias said. "The town's keeping what's needed to make restitution to Blackwell's victims." Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly protocol." "Neither was letting him terrorize a town for 3 years," Clara said, stepping forward. "That money was stolen, yes, but Blackwell used it to steal even more from us. We're just trying to make things right." The marshal studied Clara, taking in the rope burns on her neck, the determination in her eyes. "You're the seamstress, the one he tried to hang?" "I am." "Takes courage to stand up after something like that," Hawkins observed. "Most would run far and fast from a town that nearly killed them." "This is my home," Clara said simply. "You don't abandon your home just because it's broken. You fix it." Hawkins nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Deputy Kane, I'll need your full report. As for the money, I'll note that some was used for local restitution. Given the circumstances, I doubt anyone in Kansas City will object too strongly." She gestured to her men. "Bring out the prisoner." Sheriff Colton unlocked the jail, and 2 marshals emerged with Henry Blackwell between them. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, his expensive clothes wrinkled and his carefully groomed appearance gone to seed. His eyes darted around the crowd looking for sympathy or support and finding neither. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice lacking its former authority. "I have rights. I demand a lawyer." "You'll get one," Marshal Hawkins said dryly. "In Kansas City. After we book you for embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder." "Conspiracy to commit murder." Blackwell's voice cracked. "Miss Whitfield's near execution," Hawkins clarified. "Using false evidence to secure a death sentence is attempted murder in the federal government's eyes. Add that to your other crimes, and you're looking at 20 to 30 years if you're lucky." As they loaded him onto a prison wagon, Blackwell's eyes found Clara in the crowd. "You did this," he said, his voice bitter. "You ruined everything." "No," Clara replied calmly. "You ruined everything the moment you decided your greed was more important than justice. I just survived long enough for the truth to come out." "The truth?" Blackwell laughed bitterly. "The truth is that power is all that matters. I had it, and now they do." He nodded toward the marshals. "Nothing's really changed." "You're wrong," Claire said. "Everything's changed. We've learned what happens when we let fear control us. We've learned the cost of silence, and we've learned that even the powerful can be brought to justice eventually." "Eventually," Blackwell repeated mockingly. "How many suffered while you all waited for eventually?" It was a valid point, and it stung. Clara could see others in the crowd feeling it too, the weight of their inaction, the price of their cowardice. "You're right," she said, surprising him. "We waited too long. We let fear paralyze us. But that's our sin to bear, our guilt to carry. Yours is being the monster we were afraid of." Marshal Hawkins signaled her men, and the prison wagon began to move. Blackwell's last words were lost in the dust and distance, but his departure left a palpable sense of relief in the air. The boogeyman was gone, and Red Rock could finally begin to heal. As the crowd began to disperse, Victoria Graves appeared, supported by Doc Morrison and her maid. She dressed carefully, presenting a dignified appearance despite her pallor and weakness. She walked straight to Marshal Hawkins. "I need to make a statement," she said, "about my involvement in my husband's crimes." Hawkins studied her with those sharp eyes. "You're Victoria Graves? Or should I say Victoria Blackwell, see? Graves," Victoria said firmly. "I've learned our marriage wasn't legal as Henry was already married, so I suppose I'm still Victoria Graves, widow of my first husband." You're also a co-conspirator in fraud and attempted murder, Hawkins pointed out. Yes. Victoria agreed without hesitation. I am, and I'm prepared to face the consequences. But first I want to make sure you have all the information about Henry's crimes. I know where he kept his records, his real books. I know who he bribed and how much. I know everything. In exchange for what? Hawkins asked suspiciously. Nothing, Victoria said. I don't deserve leniency. I just want the truth to be known, all of it, and I want to make sure the people he hurt get justice. Hawkins considered this. You'll come with us to Kansas City. You'll testify. After that, it's up to the courts. My son can go to your sister as planned, Hawkins said, not unkindly. He's innocent in all this. As Victoria was led away, she paused near Clara. I know I have no right to ask, but will you write to me? Let me know how the town recovers. Clara considered this woman who had nearly caused her death, who had stood by while injustice was done, who had chosen her own comfort over others' lives. But she also saw a broken person trying too late perhaps to make amends. All right, Clara said finally. Not often, but all right. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face, and allowed herself to be led to a separate wagon from her husband. As the federal marshals departed with their prisoners, Red Rock stood in the dusty street watching their past disappear into the distance. It was Sheriff Colton who finally broke the silence. Well, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years, I guess we better get to work. This town won't rebuild itself. And with that simple statement, Red Rock began its transformation. Claire returned to her shop to find a line of customers waiting, women who needed work done, but also needed to talk to process what had happened to begin healing. She listened to their stories as she worked her needle, understanding that sometimes the most important repairs weren't to fabric, but to community. Elias Kane stayed in town for another week, helping establish new protocols for the sheriff's office and ensuring the transition of power was smooth. He worked with Sheriff Colton, teaching him investigative techniques and proper legal procedures, things Blackwell had never bothered with in his kangaroo court. The restitution committee met daily in Clara's shop after hours. They pored over records, interviewed victims, and slowly pieced together the full extent of Blackwell's crimes. It was worse than anyone had imagined: properties stolen through false liens, families destroyed by manufactured evidence, lives ruined by one man's greed. How did we let this happen? Theodore Hoffman asked one evening, his banker's precision overwhelmed by the sheer scale of corruption. We got comfortable, Clara said, not looking up from the ledger she was reviewing. We assumed someone else would handle it. We told ourselves it wasn't our problem until it was too late. Never again, Tom Bailey said firmly. We've learned that lesson. Have we? Clara challenged. It's easy to say never again when the wound is fresh. But what about in 5 years, 10, when we've gotten comfortable again? Then we remember this week, son, said Sarah Mitchell, the youngest member of the committee. We remember how close we came to losing everything that matters. Letters were sent to the families Blackwell had driven away. Clara personally wrote to the Chang family, pouring her heart into an apology and an invitation to return. She didn't expect a response, but she had to try. Marcus Webb's letter came back first. He would return, he wrote, but only if the town could guarantee his safety and restore his property in full. The committee voted unanimously to meet his conditions. Other responses trickled in over the following weeks. Some families were gone for good, too hurt or too settled elsewhere to return, but others were willing to come back to give Red Rock another chance. On Elias's last night in town, Clara hosted a dinner in her small apartment above the shop. It was just the two of them, a simple meal of stew and bread, but there was something meaningful in the quiet companionship. You saved my life, Clara said, raising her glass of water in a toast. I never properly thanked you for that. You saved your own life, Elias replied as he had before. I just provided the opportunity. Still, without you, I'd be dead and Blackwell would still be terrorizing this town. And without your courage on that gallows, the town might not have been ready to listen. He paused, studying her. What you said up there about forgiveness, did you mean it? Clara touched the scars on her neck, a gesture that was becoming habitual. I had to mean it. Holding on to anger would have poisoned me just as surely as that rope would have killed me. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for me. That's a generous philosophy. It's a practical one, Clara corrected. I have to live here, work here, build a life here. I can't do that if I'm consumed by resentment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night. It was different from before, less furtive, more peaceful. The fear that had gripped Red Rock for 3 years was finally loosening its hold. "Will you stay?" Clara asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. Elias looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I can't. There are other towns, other Henry Blackwells. This is what I do. Chase criminals across the frontier. Bring justice to places that have forgotten what it looks like," he corrected. "It's not much of a life, but it's necessary." "It's lonely," Clara observed. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But seeing towns like this recover, seeing people like you stand up and rebuild, that makes it worthwhile." Clara wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to offer him something more than a week's accommodation and simple meals. But she understood that he had his own path to follow, just as she had hers. "If you're ever back this way," she said instead, "you'll always have a room here." "I'll remember that," he said, and she believed he would. The next morning, Elias Kane rode out of Red Rock as the sun painted the desert gold. Clara watched from her window as his figure grew smaller against the vast landscape until he was just a speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. Sheriff Colton stopped by later that morning, looking more like the lawman he'd once been and might be again. "The committee meeting's in an hour," he reminded her. "I'll be there," Clara said, turning from the window. "We have work to do." And they did. Over the following weeks, Red Rock transformed itself piece by piece. The empty lot where the gallows had stood became a small park with benches and shade trees that would grow tall in time. The Chang family, to everyone's surprise and joy, agreed to return, and the town helped them rebuild their laundry even better than before. Marcus Webb returned to his ranch with his family, and the property lines were properly restored. Other families trickled back cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they saw the town's genuine efforts at reconciliation. Clara's restitution committee worked tirelessly, ensuring fair compensation to all of Blackwell's victims. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could fully restore what had been lost, but it was honest effort, and that counted for something. 3 months after the near hanging, Clara received a letter from Kansas City. It was from Victoria Graves, writing from federal prison, where she was serving a 5-year sentence for her role in her husband's crimes. "Dear Miss Whitfield," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds you well and that Red Rock continues to heal. I think of the town often and of my role in its suffering. Prison is hard, but no harder than living with my guilt would have been on the outside. I'm teaching reading to other inmates here, trying to give something back. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something. Samuel is well thriving with my sister's family. He doesn't understand why I'm gone, but he's happy, and that's all that matters. Thank you for your forgiveness, even though I didn't deserve it. It has given me the strength to try to forgive myself, though that journey is far from over. With deepest respect and regret, Victoria Graves." Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. She would write back as promised, but not today. Today she had 3 dresses to finish, a committee meeting to chair, and a life to live in a town that was slowly learning to trust again. 6 months to the day after the attempted hanging, Red Rock held another vote on Sheriff Colton's position. He had kept his promises: no drinking, complete transparency, regular reports to the town council. He had investigated crimes, properly maintained order fairly, and slowly earned back the trust he'd squandered. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Sheriff James Colton would continue to serve Red Rock no longer as a puppet of corruption, but as a guardian of justice. When the results were announced, he broke down in tears, the weight of redemption overwhelming him. "Thank you," he said to Clara afterward, "for believing people could change." "We all changed," Clara replied. "That morning at the gallows changed everyone. The question was whether we'd learn from it or let it destroy us." A year later, Red Rock had become something of a symbol in the territory, a town that had faced its demons and won. Other communities dealing with corruption sought their advice, and Clara found herself corresponding with reformers across the frontier. The seamstress shop became more than just a business. It became a gathering place for those working to keep the town honest. Women would come for alterations and stay for discussions about governance, justice, and community. Clara's voice, once nearly silenced forever, had become one of the strongest in Red Rock. One evening, as Clara was closing her shop, she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Through her window, she saw a rider dismount in a cloud of dust, and her heart skipped when she recognized the familiar figure. Elias Kane stood in her doorway, but this wasn't the composed marshal who had left a year ago. Blood soaked through his shirt, and his face was pale with pain. "Clara," he said, swaying on his feet, "I'm sorry to trouble you, but I remembered your offer about that room." She caught him as he collapsed his weight, nearly taking them both to the floor. "Sheriff Colton," she shouted into the street, knowing someone would hear and fetch him. "Get Doc Morrison. Now." Together they managed to get Elias upstairs and onto the bed. Doc Morrison arrived within minutes, his medical bag in hand, and immediately went to work. The bullet wound in Elias's shoulder was bad, but not fatal, though he'd lost a dangerous amount of blood. "What happened?" Clara asked as she helped the doctor clean the wound. "Henry Blackwell," Elias muttered through gritted teeth. "He escaped during a prison transfer 2 weeks ago. I've been tracking him." The room went cold. Clara's hand instinctively went to her neck, to the scars that had finally begun to fade. "He escaped. Killed 2 guards," Elias confirmed, wincing as Doc Morrison probed the wound. "Had help from some old associates in Kansas City. They'd been robbing their way west, leaving bodies behind them." Sheriff Colton had arrived by then, his face grim. "Is he coming here?" "That's my guess," Elias said. "He blames Clara for his downfall. Blames the whole town, really, but she's the symbol of it. I've been following his trail, and it leads straight toward Red Rock." "How many men?" Colton asked, already thinking tactically. "At least 6, maybe more. Professional gunmen, not local thugs." Elias tried to sit up, but Doc Morrison pushed him back down. "You need to evacuate the women and children. This is going to be bad." "No," Clara said firmly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We're not running. We're not letting fear control us again." "Clara, this isn't about fear," Elias argued. "This is about survival. These men are killers." "And last time we faced Blackwell, we were sheep," Clara countered. "Scattered, afraid, alone. But we're not that town anymore. We've spent a year building something better, stronger. If we run now, we'll never stop running." Sheriff Colton nodded slowly. "She's right. If we evacuate Blackwell, we'll just burn the empty buildings and wait for us to return. We make our stand here." "You don't understand what you're facing," Elias insisted, frustration evident despite his pain. "These aren't corrupt officials or local bullies. These are men who kill for sport." "Then teach us," Clara said simply. "You've got, 2 days before you think they'll arrive, maybe 3. Teach us how to defend ourselves." Doc Morrison finished bandaging Elias's shoulder. "He needs rest, not a training campaign." "He needs this town to survive, so his sacrifice means something," Clara replied. She looked at Elias directly. "You came here wounded, riding hard to warn us instead of getting help elsewhere. That tells me you care about what happens to us. So help us. Not by fighting our battle, but by showing us how to fight it ourselves." The next morning, despite Doc Morrison's protests, Elias was up and organizing the town's defense. His arm was in a sling, but his mind was sharp as ever. He gathered the able-bodied adults in the town square where the gallows had once stood. "First thing you need to understand," he said, his voice carrying despite his injury, "is that this isn't about being heroes. It's about survival and protecting what's yours. Blackwell wants revenge, but his men just want easy money. Make it hard enough, and they might decide it's not worth it." Tom Bailey had brought every gun from his smithy, laying them out onto tables. "We've got plenty of weapons, but not many who know how to use them properly." "That's what we're fixing," Elias said. He began organizing them into groups, those with shooting experience, those who could learn quickly, and those better suited for other tasks. Clara watched him work, seeing the tactical mind that had tracked Blackwell across multiple states. Sarah Mitchell, now 18 and engaged to the baker's son, surprised everyone by being one of the best shots. "My daddy taught me before he died," she said simply, handling the rifle with practiced ease. The Chang family's eldest son, Robert, who had returned with his parents, proved excellent at setting up defensive positions. "We learned a few things in Sacramento," he said with a grim smile. Not every town was welcoming to Chinese families. As the day progressed, Red Rock transformed into something unprecedented, a frontier town preparing for war. Not with fear, but with determination. Women who had never held guns learned to load and shoot. Men who had avoided conflict their entire lives learned basic tactical movements. Even the elderly contributed, preparing medical supplies and fortifying buildings. Clara found herself appointed as a coordinator, moving between groups, ensuring communication and supplies flowed properly. It felt strange preparing for violence when she had preached forgiveness for so long, but forgiveness didn't mean allowing evil to triumph. That evening, a scout Colton had posted "Rode in hard." Riders coming, 8 of them, about 5 miles out. The town scrambled into position. Elias, despite his injury, took a strategic position on the roof of the hotel where he could see the entire main street. Clara stationed herself in her shop with 3 other women all armed and ready. But the riders who appeared weren't what they expected. It was a family farmer's by their look, their wagon riddled with bullet holes, the father bleeding from a shoulder wound remarkably similar to Elias's. "Please," the mother cried. "We need help. They're right behind us." Doc Morrison rushed out to tend the wounded man while Sheriff Colton questioned them. Their farm had been hit that morning. Blackwell's gang had taken their supplies and horses, but the family had managed to escape in their wagon. "How far behind, Chess?" Colton asked urgently. "Maybe an hour," the father gasped through his pain. They were taking their time enjoying themselves. They burned everything. Clara helped the mother and her 2 young children into her shop. The woman was trembling, her eyes hollow with shock. "They laughed," she whispered. "While our home burned, they laughed." The sound of approaching horses ended any further conversation. Clara positioned herself at the window rifle, ready, heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth for Red Rock's transformation. Henry Blackwell rode at the front of his gang, but he was barely recognizable. Prison and escape had hardened him into something savage. His once pristine appearance was replaced by wild hair and eyes that held nothing but rage. The 7 men with him were equally rough, wearing their violence like badges of honor. They stopped in the middle of the main street, exactly where the gallows had stood. Blackwell's voice rang out harsh and mocking. "Well, well, Red Rock, did you miss me?" Sheriff Colton stepped out of his office, badge gleaming, gun holstered but ready. "Henry Blackwell, you're under arrest for murder and escape from federal custody. Surrender now, and no one else needs to die." Blackwell laughed an ugly sound that sent chills through those listening. "Arrest you forget, Sheriff. I owned you once. You were my dog whimpering for scraps, and now you want to arrest me." "That was before," Colton said steadily. "This is now, and now you're just another criminal." "Criminal?" Blackwell's voice rose to a roar. "I was a judge. I brought order to this cesspool, and you let that seamstress whore destroy everything." A shot rang out, and Blackwell's hat flew off his head. From the hotel roof, Elias's voice carried clear and cold. "Watch your mouth, Henry. The next one won't miss." Blackwell's men immediately drew their weapons, but found themselves facing guns from every window, every doorway. The entire town had armed itself and taken position. "Interesting," Blackwell said, his rage temporarily replaced by calculation. "The sheep have grown teeth." "We're not sheep anymore," Clara called out from her window. "We're a community, and you're not welcome here." Blackwell's eyes found her, and his face twisted with hatred. "Clara Whitfield, the woman who should have hanged. Do you know how many nights I've dreamed of watching you die?" "Probably as many nights as I've been grateful to be alive," Clara replied. "But your dreams don't matter anymore, Henry. You have no power here." "No power?" Blackwell gestured to his men. "I have 7 guns that say otherwise." "And we have 60, Sheriff Colton said. "Every adult in this town is armed and ready. You can start a fight, but you won't win it." One of Blackwell's men, a scarred gunslinger with cold eyes, spoke up. "Boss, this ain't what we signed up for. You said it was a soft town, easy pickings." "It was," Blackwell snarled. "These people are cowards. They let me rule them for 3 years." "That was before we learned what courage looks like," Tom Bailey called out from the blacksmith shop. "Before we remembered what we were fighting for." "Pretty speeches," another of Blackwell's men said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "But speeches don't stop bullets." "No," Elias agreed from his perch. But bullets stop bullets. And I've got a clear shot at every one of you. I might be wounded, but I can still put a round through your head at this distance. Want to test me? The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could feel the town holding its breath, fingers on triggers waiting for the violence to explode. But she also felt something else resolve. Red Rock wasn't backing down. You've poisoned them, Blackwell said to Clara, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. Made them think they're brave. But bravery is just another word for stupidity. And what's cowardice? Clara asked. Another word for survival. We tried that under your rule. It nearly destroyed us. I gave you order. You gave us fear, Clara corrected. You gave us corruption and lies and injustice. You turned neighbor against neighbor, made us complicit in our own oppression. But that's over now. Blackwell suddenly smiled an expression that made Clara's blood run cold. Is it... You think this ends with a standoff? You think I'll just ride away? He pulled something from his saddlebag, a bottle with a rag stuffed in its neck. You know what this is, Greek fire, they used to call it? These buildings will burn beautifully. Your homes, your businesses, your lives, all ash. You burn one building and you'll be dead before the flames spread, Elias warned. Maybe, Blackwell agreed. But the building will still burn, and the one after that, and the one after that. How many of you are willing to die to stop us? How many of your neighbors' lives are worth your principles? This was the test, Clara realized. Not of their marksmanship or their tactics, but of their unity. Would they stand together or would fear divide them again? It was Mrs. Chang who broke the silence, her voice carrying from the rebuilt laundry. Mr. Blackwell, you burned us out once before. We rebuilt. You can burn us out again and we'll rebuild again, but you'll still be dead. The Chinaman's woman speaks, Blackwell mocked. How progressive of Red Rock. Robert Chang's rifle cracked and the bottle in Blackwell's hand exploded, covering him with the flammable liquid. He screamed, falling from his horse, frantically trying to wipe the substance from his clothes. Anyone lights a match and your boss burns, Robert said calmly. Anyone moves wrong, and we light the match. Blackwell's men froze, suddenly aware of how precarious their position was. Their leader was soaked in Greek fire, and 60 guns were trained on them from all angles. The scarred gunslinger slowly raised his hands. This ain't our fight. We came for easy money, not a war. Then ride away, Sheriff Colton said. Leave Blackwell and ride away. No one will stop you. You can't, Blackwell screamed from the ground. I paid you. You work for me. Job's over, boss, the gunslinger said, already turning his horse. Good luck with your revenge. One by one, the other hired guns followed suit, leaving Blackwell alone in the street, soaked in his own weapon, surrounded by the town he'd tried to destroy. You cowards, he screamed after them. You worthless scum, I'll hunt you down. You'll do nothing, Clara said, finally emerging from her shop. She walked toward him slowly, rifle still in hand but pointed down. You're finished, Henry, again. Stay back. He scrambled away from her, his former authority completely gone. Someone help me, please. Like you helped me when I stood on your gallows, Clara asked. Like you helped the families you destroyed. She stopped a few feet from him, looking down at the man who had nearly killed her. He looked small now, pathetic, covered in fuel and dirt, all his pretense stripped away. You want to know the difference between us, Henry? She said quietly. I found strength in forgiveness. You found weakness in hatred. I built something with my second chance. You destroyed everything with yours. Sheriff Colton approached with shackles. Henry Blackwell, you're under arrest. Again. And this time you're not escaping. As they hauled Blackwell to his feet, he made one last desperate grab for Colton's gun. The sheriff, expecting this, easily knocked him down. But Blackwell's hand found a match in his pocket, and his eyes gleamed with madness. If I burn, you burn with me, he screamed, striking the match. Several things happened at once. Clara kicked dirt at the match, extinguishing it before it fully caught. Elias's rifle cracked from the roof, the bullet striking Blackwell's hand and sending the matchbox flying. And Sheriff Colton brought his pistol butt down on Blackwell's head, finally knocking him unconscious. The town stood in stunned silence for a moment, then erupted in celebration. They had faced their demon and won not through violence, but through unity, not through fear, but through courage. Doc Morrison emerged to treat Blackwell's hand, ensuring he'd survive for trial. "Can't have him dying before justice is served," he muttered, though his gentle touch was at odds with his gruff words. As they secured Blackwell in the jail, the same cell he'd once used to hold his enemies, Clara found herself standing again where the gallows had been. But now, instead of rough wood and rope, there were the beginnings of a garden-green shoots pushing through the desert soil. Elias climbed down from the roof, his wounded shoulder obviously paining him, but his expression satisfied. "You did it," he said to Clara. "The town stood together." "We all did it," Clara corrected, "even you wounded as you are." "I had the easy job," Elias said. "Shooting is simple. Building courage in others. That's the real challenge." Sheriff Colton approached them, his badge still bright despite the dust of conflict. "Federal marshals are already on their way. I sent word as soon as that farm family arrived. They'll be here by morning to take Blackwell." "Again," Clara added with a slight smile. "This time will be different," Colton assured her. "He killed federal guards. He's never seen freedom again." As the sun set over Red Rock, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the townspeople began to gather in the square. Not in fear or obligation, but in genuine community. Someone brought out a fiddle and music filled the air. Children who had been hidden during the confrontation ran and played. The farmer's family tended and welcomed, shared their story with sympathetic neighbors. Clara watched it all from her shop's doorway, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The town had been tested twice by the same evil, and twice they had overcome it the second time stronger than the first. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Elias observed, joining her. "I'm thinking about cycles," Clara said. "How we often face the same challenges repeatedly, but each time we can choose to handle them better." "Or worse," Elias pointed out. "True, but we chose better. We chose to stand instead of kneel, to unite instead of divide. And if Blackwell had succeeded in burning the town," Clara considered this, "then we would have rebuilt. Again. As many times as necessary. That's what communities do, they endure." The next morning, Chief Marshal Ruth Hawkins arrived with a full escort, her face grim when she learned of Blackwell's escape and recapture. "You should have seen the damage he did between Kansas City and here," she told them. 3 families dead, 2 towns robbed. You're lucky to be alive." "Not lucky," Clara corrected respectfully. "Prepared. We learned from last time." Hawkins studied the seamstress with those sharp eyes. "I heard about what happened here before with the near hanging. Seems you've become something of a guardian angel for this town." "Just a seamstress who refuses to be silenced," Clara replied. As they prepared to load Blackwell into the armored prison wagon, a much more secure arrangement than last time he regained consciousness, his eyes found Clara immediately burning with undiminished hatred. "This isn't over, he rasped. "I'll find a way. No." Clara interrupted, her voice calm and final. "It is over. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cell, remembering how a town you terrorized found the courage to defeat you, twice. And every day you'll know that we're out here living, thriving, free. That's your real punishment, Henry, knowing we survived you." Something in her words must have reached him, because for the first time real defeat showed in his eyes. As the wagon rolled away, heavily guarded this time, Clara knew she would never see Henry Blackwell again. The town returned to its rhythm quickly, but it was a different rhythm now. The shared danger had bonded them in ways that years of peaceful coexistence hadn't. The farmer's family decided to stay, buying a small plot at the edge of town. The hired guns were never seen again, apparently deciding that whatever Blackwell had paid them wasn't worth the risk of staying. Elias remained in Red Rock for 2 weeks while his shoulder healed. During that time, he helped Sheriff Colton establish new security protocols and trained a volunteer militia to handle future threats. But Clara could see the restlessness in him, the call of the open trail, and other towns that needed help. "You're leaving again?" she said one evening as they sat in her garden watching the stars emerge. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. "There's trouble brewing in Colorado. A mining town with a corrupt owner who reminds me of Blackwell. Another rescue mission. Another chance to help people find their courage," he corrected, That's all I really do, show them they're stronger than they think." "You do more than that," Clara said softly. "You give them hope that justice exists even in the darkest places." They sat in comfortable silence, both aware of what wasn't being said. The attraction between them was real, had been since that first day at the gallows. But they both knew their paths diverged here, his toward endless wandering, hers toward building something permanent. "If you ever get tired of the trail," Clara said finally, "there's always a place for you here." "And if you ever get tired of staying put," Elias replied, "there's a whole frontier that could use your courage." They both knew neither would take the other's offer, but the making of it mattered. The next morning, Elias Kane rode out again, but this time the town gathered to see him off. Children waved, women blessed him, and men shook his hand with genuine respect. He was no longer the mysterious drunk who had saved them, but a friend who had helped them save themselves. Clara watched him go from the same window as before, but this time without sadness. She had her purpose, and he had his. Both were necessary, both were noble, and both required sacrifices. As his figure disappeared into the desert shimmer, Sarah Mitchell appeared at Clara's elbow. "Do you think we'll see him again?" "Maybe," Clara said. "The frontier has a way of bringing people back around. But even if we don't, we'll remember what he taught us." "What was that?" Clara smiled, touching the fading scars on her neck one last time. "That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. That justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silenced." Over the following months, Red Rock continued to transform. The town council, now properly elected, and diverse passed laws ensuring no single person could accumulate the power Blackwell had wielded. The militia trained regularly, but never had to fight their very existence, deterred those who might have seen the town as easy prey. Clara's seamstress shop expanded, taking on apprentices, including several young women who had been inspired by her courage. She taught them more than just needlework. She taught them to speak up, to stand firm, to never let fear make them accomplices to injustice. The garden where the gallows had stood grew lush and green, an oasis in the desert landscape. Children played there, couples courted there, and old-timers told stories there. It became the heart of the town, a reminder that beauty could grow from the darkest soil. 6 months after Blackwell's final capture, Clara received a letter from Kansas City. It was from the federal prosecutor informing her that Henry Blackwell had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. A small note was attached in familiar handwriting. "He'll never hurt anyone again." The town's courage made the difference. 12 witnesses came forward because of Red Rock's example. "You lit a fire," Clara won, "that's spreading across the frontier. Towns are standing up, speaking out, refusing to be ruled by fear. You should be proud. E.K." Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it with Victoria's letters in her drawer. These were testimonies to Red Rock's journey, reminders of how far they'd come. Victoria still wrote monthly from prison, each letter showing more self-awareness and genuine remorse. She had become a teacher to other inmates, finding purpose in her punishment. Her son Samuel was thriving with his aunt's family, protected from the scandal, and given the chance at a normal life his mother's choices had nearly denied him. Sheriff Colton had been officially re-elected twice now, each time by a wider margin. He hadn't touched a drop of whiskey since that morning at the gallows, and his dedication to fair law enforcement had made Red Rock a model for other frontier towns. The Chang family's business prospered, their acceptance by the community complete and genuine. Their story of persecution and return had become part of Red Rock's narrative of redemption. Marcus Webb's ranch had become one of the most successful in the territory, and he used his prosperity to help other families establish themselves. He never forgot how close he'd come to losing everything, and that memory made him generous. 2 years passed, and Red Rock had grown into something neither Clara nor anyone else could have imagined. The town that had nearly executed an innocent woman had become a beacon of justice in the territory, attracting families seeking honest governance and fair opportunity. Clara's shop now employed 6 seamstresses, and she had opened a small school above it where young women learned not just sewing but reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed again. Clara was teaching a class on embroidery techniques when young Timothy Henderson burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Miss Clara!" There's a woman at the sheriff's office. She says she's Henry Blackwell's first wife, the real one from back east. Clara set down her needle carefully, her mind racing. Are you certain that's what she said? Yes, ma'am. She's got papers and everything. Sheriff Colton sent me to fetch you right away. Clara dismissed her class and followed Timothy through the dusty streets. A crowd had already gathered outside the sheriff's office, their voices a mix of curiosity and concern. She pushed through them and found Sheriff Colton standing with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a different world entirely. She was perhaps 45, with graying hair pulled into an elegant bun and clothes that spoke of Eastern refinement. But it was her eyes that caught Clara's attention. They held a weariness that fine clothing couldn't disguise. Mrs. Blackwell, Clara said carefully. The woman turned, studying Clara with intelligent eyes. Miss Whitfield, I presume the seamstress who exposed my husband. Former husband, Clara corrected gently. And yes, I'm Clara Whitfield. My name is Margaret Blackwell, or rather, Margaret Donovan now. I've taken back my maiden name. She pulled a worn envelope from her purse. I've come because I received this letter from Victoria Graves. She wrote to me from prison, told me everything that happened here, everything Henry did. Sheriff Colton shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, we had no idea you existed until the trial. Blackwell had told everyone you were dead. Margaret laughed bitterly. Dead would have been kinder than what he did to me, but I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because Victoria's letter mentioned something that no one else seems to know. Henry had a partner, someone who helped him establish his false identity, someone who's still out there. The office fell silent. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, the old fear trying to resurface. A partner who... A man named Charles Worthington. He's a judge, too, a real one appointed by the territorial government. He and Henry were in business together in Kansas City before Henry fled. Charles provided the forged documents, the references, everything Henry needed to become Mortimer Graves. Why didn't this come out at the trial? Sheriff Colton asked. Because Charles is careful, much more careful than Henry ever was. There's no paper trail linking them, nothing that would stand up in court. But I know the truth because I heard them planning it the night before Henry left me for dead. Clara guided Margaret to a chair, seeing how the woman trembled despite her composed exterior. Tell us what happened. All of it. Margaret accepted a glass of water from Colton before beginning. Henry and I were married for 10 years. The first 5 were acceptable. He was ambitious, charming when he wanted to be. But then he got involved with political corruption in Kansas City, started taking bribes, embezzling funds. When I confronted him about it, he became violent. She paused, her hand unconsciously moving to her throat in a gesture Clara recognized all too well. The night he left, Charles Worthington came to our house. They thought I was unconscious from the beating Henry had given me, but I heard everything. Charles had prepared a complete new identity for Henry Mortimer Graves, a judge from Pennsylvania whose whole family had died in a fire, leaving no one to contradict the impersonation. And Worthington's payment for this service, Clara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Half of everything Henry stole to be collected once Henry was established. Charles even suggested Red Rock as the perfect place, far enough from Kansas City to avoid immediate detection, but close enough to territorial power to be profitable. Sheriff Colton stood up abruptly. If Worthington is still a territorial judge, he could be placing other criminals in positions of power. This could be happening in towns across the frontier. It is, Margaret said simply. I've spent 2 years investigating, following paper trails, talking to people who were too frightened to speak before. Charles Worthington has created at least 4 false identities that I know of, all for criminals who paid him well. Red Rock wasn't unique. It was a test case that worked too well. Clara felt the weight of this revelation settling on the room like dust after a storm. They had thought their fight was over, but it had only been the beginning. Where is Worthington now? Denver, Margaret replied. Sitting on the territorial Supreme Court, above suspicion, above reproach. He's untouchable through normal legal channels because he controls those channels. Then we go through abnormal ones, a familiar voice said from the doorway. Clara's heart leaped as she turned to see Elias Kane standing there, dustier than ever, but with that same determined glint in his eyes. Elias, how did you... Got word about Mrs. Donovan's arrival through Marshall channels, he said, tipping his hat to Margaret. I've been investigating Worthington myself for 6 months, ever since certain patterns started emerging. Corrupt officials in different towns, all with impeccable paperwork, all with references from the same sources. Can you prove it? Sheriff Colton asked. Not yet, Elias admitted. But with Mrs. Donovan's testimony and what Red Rock knows about Blackwell's methods, we might have enough to start building a case. Margaret stood up, her composure fully returned. I have more than testimony. I have Henry's private journals hidden in our old house in Kansas City. He documented everything, every bribe, every conspiracy, every crime, including his dealings with Charles Worthington. Why didn't you bring these forward before? Clara asked. Because I was terrified, Margaret admitted. Charles Worthington had made it clear that if I ever surfaced, I'd meet with an accident. But Victoria's letter changed my mind. She wrote about courage, about redemption, about a town that stood up to tyranny. I realized I'd been a coward long enough. Clara understood that feeling intimately. So what do we do? How do we bring down a territorial Supreme Court judge? Elias pulled out a map, spreading it on Colton's desk. We build a coalition. Red Rock was the first domino to fall, but there are other towns suffering under Worthington's planted officials. If we can connect them, get them to stand together like Red Rock did, we might have enough political pressure to force an investigation. That's a lot of travel, Colton observed. A lot of danger. I'll go, Clara said suddenly, surprising everyone, including herself. I'll travel to these towns, tell Red Rock's story, show them it's possible to fight back. Clara, no, Elias said immediately. It's too dangerous. Worthington will know you're coming. He'll try to stop you. Then I'll need protection, Clara said, looking directly at him, from someone who knows how to handle danger. Their eyes met and held years of unspoken feelings passing between them in that glance. Elias nodded slowly. If you're determined to do this, I won't let you do it alone. Sheriff Colton cleared his throat. The town council will need to approve this, and we'll need someone to run the seamstress shop while you're gone. Sarah Mitchell, Clara said without hesitation. She's ready. She's been ready for months. Margaret Donovan stood straighter, a new purpose visible in her bearing. I'll come too. It's time I stopped hiding from what Henry and Charles did. My testimony combined with the journals might be enough to start federal involvement. Over the next 3 days, Red Rock prepared for what everyone understood was a crucial mission. The town council voted unanimously to support Clara's journey, even providing funds for expenses. Sarah Mitchell accepted responsibility for the shop with tears of pride in her eyes, promising to maintain Clara's standards of both craftsmanship and courage. Doc Morrison prepared medical supplies, muttering about foolish heroes, while carefully packing bandages and medicines. The Chang family provided traveling clothes specially reinforced for hard riding. Tom Bailey crafted a small, concealable pistol for Clara, insisting she learn to use it despite her discomfort with weapons. You're not going out there to shoot anyone? He said as he taught her the basics. But sometimes just having it is enough to prevent violence. The night before their departure, the town held a gathering in the garden where the gallows had stood. It wasn't a celebration exactly, more a solemn recognition of what Clara was risking for the greater good. People brought food, shared stories, and offered prayers for safe travel. Sheriff Colton pulled Clara aside during the gathering. You know you don't have to do this. Red Rock is safe now. We could just protect what we have. Could we? Clara challenged gently. Knowing that other towns are suffering what we suffered. Knowing that the man who made our nightmare possible is still out there creating more Henry Blackwells. Colton nodded slowly. I figured you'd say that. Just wanted to make sure you'd thought it through. I've done nothing but think since Margaret arrived, Clara admitted. This feels like the natural next step. We learned to stand up for ourselves. Now we need to teach others to do the same. As the gathering wound down, Clara found herself walking with Elias through the garden, the stars brilliant overhead. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Once we start, Worthington will know we're coming. He has resources, connections, hired guns at his disposal. I stood on a gallows with a rope around my neck, Clara reminded him. Everything since then has been borrowed time. I might as well use it for something meaningful. That's a dark way to look at it. Or a liberating one, Clara countered. When you face death and survived, you realize that the worst thing that can happen is you die. And we're all going to die eventually. The question is whether we'll have lived first. Elias stopped walking, turning to face her fully. You've changed. The frightened seamstress on the gallows would never have proposed this mission. That woman died on the gallows, Clara said simply. Who survived was someone else, someone who learned that courage isn't a feeling but a choice, and I choose to keep fighting even if the battlefield has expanded. They stood close in the starlight, the moment heavy with possibility, but both knew this wasn't the time, not with the mission ahead and the dangers waiting. Instead, Elias simply took her hand, squeezing it gently. Then we fight together, he said, for as long as it takes. The next morning dawned clear and cold with a wind that promised change. Clara stood in her shop one last time, looking at the space that had been her sanctuary and prison, her workplace and battleground. Sarah stood beside her, holding the keys that Clara was passing on. Take care of it, Clara said softly. But more importantly, take care of the women who come here. Listen to their stories. Help them find their voices. Just like you did for us, Sarah promised, embracing her mentor tightly. Outside, 3 horses waited. Elias had chosen them carefully, strong enough for hard travel, but unremarkable enough to avoid attention. Margaret Donovan had traded her Eastern finery for practical riding clothes, though she still maintained an air of dignity that rough fabric couldn't diminish. Sheriff Colton handed Elias a packet of papers. Letters of introduction to sheriffs I trust in other towns. Not many, but it's a start. Every bit helps, Elias said, securing the papers in his saddlebag. As they prepared to mount it, seemed the entire town had gathered to see them off. The Chang family, the Webbs, the Hendersons, Doc Morrison, even some of the farmers from outlying areas who had heard about the mission. These were people who had learned the cost of silence and the value of courage. We'll be back, Clara promised them, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. We'll be here, Tom Bailey responded for the crowd. However long it takes, Red Rock will be here when you return. Clara mounted her horse, surprised at how natural it felt, despite her limited riding experience. Perhaps facing death had made all other challenges seem manageable by comparison. She looked back at the town one more time, at the garden where the gallows had stood at her shop, with its new proprietor, at the people who had become her family. Then she turned toward the horizon and rode forward, flanked by Elias and Margaret, toward whatever awaited them on the road ahead. Their first destination was Millbrook, a mining town 2 days' ride north, where Elias had heard rumors of a corrupt magistrate who bore all the hallmarks of Worthington's handiwork. The journey gave them time to plan, to share information, and to prepare for the resistance they would certainly face. Tell me about Worthington, Clara said to Margaret as they rode through a narrow canyon. What kind of man is he? Margaret considered the question carefully. Brilliant, ruthless, and completely amoral. He sees law not as justice, but as a tool for power. Henry was greedy and violent, but Charles is something worse. He's systematic. He doesn't just corrupt individuals, he corrupts entire systems. How did Henry meet him? Elias asked. Through political circles in Kansas City. Charles was already established as a lawyer who could make problems disappear for the right price. Henry needed problems to disappear, and Charles needed someone desperate enough to test his new identity system. So Henry was an experiment, Clara mused. A successful one from Charles's perspective, Margaret said bitterly, until you brought him down. They made camp that first night near a small stream, the desert giving way to scrub forest as they climbed in elevation. Elias set up a defensive perimeter while Clara and Margaret prepared a simple meal. It was domestic in a strange way. 3 people united by purpose rather than affection, though Clara was increasingly aware of the growing connection between herself and Elias. What do you think we'll find in Millbrook? Clara asked as they ate. Fear, Elias said simply. The same fear that gripped Red Rock. But also hope buried maybe but there. There's always someone willing to stand up. They just need to know they're not alone. And if they're not ready? If they're too afraid? Margaret asked. Then we plant seeds and move on, Clara said. Not every town will be ready to hear the message. But some will, and those will inspire others. Change doesn't happen all at once. It spreads like ripples on water. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the sounds of the wilderness, so different from the familiar noises of Red Rock. She thought about the journey ahead, the dangers they would face, the lives that hung in the balance. It was overwhelming when considered all at once, so she broke it down to the next step, the next town, the next conversation. That was how courage worked. She had learned one small, brave act at a time. They reached Millbrook late the second day as the sun was setting behind the mountains that gave the town its mineral wealth. It was larger than Red Rock, more prosperous on the surface, but Clara could sense the underlying tension immediately. People walked quickly, eyes down, conversations hushed. It was eerily familiar. They took rooms at the least conspicuous inn they could find, presenting themselves as traveling merchants. The innkeeper, a nervous man named Josiah, barely looked at them as he handed over the keys. "Kitchen closes at 8, he mumbled. "No visitors after 9. No loud noises. No trouble." "Seems like a lot of rules," Elias observed casually. Josiah's face went pale. "Magistrate Harrow's orders. He likes an orderly town." After Josiah scurried away, the three gathered in Clara's room to discuss their approach. "Magistrate Harrow," Elias said thoughtfully. "I've heard that name, but there's no record of him before 3 years ago." "Same time frame as Henry's transformation," Margaret noted. "Charles must have been busy." "We need to find someone willing to talk," Clara said. "Someone who's suffered under Harrow's rule but hasn't been completely broken." "The innkeeper mentioned a kitchen," Elias suggested. "Kitchens are where the real information flows. I'll see what I can learn there." While Elias went to gather intelligence, Clara and Margaret ventured into the town's main street. Even in the fading light, they could see the signs of oppression. Businesses closed early windows, shuttered people hurrying home, as if afraid to be caught outside after dark. They found what they were looking for at a small general store that was just closing. The owner, a middle-aged woman with worry lines etched deep in her face, was turning the sign when Clara approached. "Please," Clara said softly, "we're new in town and need some supplies. Could you spare just a moment?" The woman looked around nervously, then quickly ushered them inside. "Make it fast. Magistrate doesn't like businesses open after sunset without his permission." As they pretended to shop, Clara carefully probed. "The magistrate seems very particular about order." The woman laughed bitterly. "Order, that's what he calls it. I call it something else, but not out loud. Not anymore." "Anymore?" Margaret prompted gently. The woman's eyes darted to the door, then back to them. "You're not from around here. Take my advice, buy what you need, and leave tomorrow. This isn't a good place for strangers." Clara made a decision. She pulled down the collar of her dress, revealing the rope scars on her neck. The woman gasped. "My name is Clara Whitfield," she said quietly. "I'm from Red Rock. 2 years ago, a corrupt judge named Henry Blackwell tried to hang me for a crime I didn't commit. We discovered he was placed in power by someone else, someone who's done the same thing here." The woman's hands shook as she reached out to touch the scars. "Dear God, you survived." "The town stood up to him," Clara said. "Together we brought him down. He's in federal prison now for life. The man who put him in power is named Charles Worthington, and we believe he's also responsible for Magistrate Harrow." The woman sank onto a stool, tears streaming down her face. "Harrow killed my husband. Oh, not directly, but he might as well have. Tom spoke out against the new mining taxes, said they were illegal. Harrow had him arrested for sedition. Tom died in that jail, supposedly from a fall, but I know better." "What's your name?" Clara asked gently. "Ellen Morrison." "Ellen, we're here to help, but we need information, evidence, and people willing to stand together. Can you help us?" Ellen was quiet for a long moment, then stood with new determination. "There are others. Families who've lost everything to Harrow's laws. We meet sometimes in secret just to remind ourselves we're not alone. I can take you to them." That night in the basement of an abandoned church, Clara told her story to 15 frightened but desperate citizens of Millbrook. She showed them her scars, told them about the gallows, about Elias's arrival, about Red Rock's transformation. Margaret added her testimony about Worthington's network, and Elias laid out what they knew about the pattern of corruption. "You're asking us to risk everything," said a man who introduced himself as James Cooper, a former mine owner who'd lost his claim to one of Harrow's associates. "I'm asking you to risk everything to get everything back," Clara corrected. Right now, you're dying slowly, losing a piece of your freedom every day. At least if you fight, you have a chance. Harrow has guns, men who enforce his laws, another person argued. So did Blackwell, Clara said. But guns are only powerful if people are afraid of them. When an entire town stands together, even hired guns think twice. The meeting went late into the night with heated debates and careful planning. Not everyone was convinced, but enough were willing to try. They would start small, documenting Harrow's crimes, gathering evidence, building a network of resistance. As they prepared to leave, Ellen Morrison pulled Clara aside. There's something else. Harrow received a telegraph yesterday. He was furious after reading it, kept saying something about loose ends and Red Rock problems. I think he knows you're here. Clara felt the familiar chill of fear but pushed it down. Then we'd better work fast. The next morning brought confirmation of Ellen's warning. Magistrate Harrow himself appeared at the inn, accompanied by 4 armed men. He was younger than Blackwell had been, perhaps 35, with cold blue eyes and an unsettling smile. I hear we have visitors from Red Rock, he said pleasantly, though the threat underneath was clear. How interesting. I've heard so much about your town's transformation. News travels, Elias said casually, his hand resting near his gun. Indeed it does, Harrow agreed, as does trouble. I trust you're not here to cause any... We're traveling merchants, Clara said, meeting his gaze steadily, looking for business opportunities. The only business opportunity in Millbrook is to follow the law, Harrow said. My law. I'd hate for you to misunderstand that and find yourselves in the same position as other troublemakers. It was a clear threat, and everyone in the inn's common room heard it. But Clara also heard something else fear. Harrow was afraid of them, afraid of what they represented. We understand perfectly, she said. The law should be respected. Real law, that is. Federal law, territorial law, the kind that doesn't change based on one man's whims. Harrow's smile disappeared. Be very careful, Miss Whitfield, smiled Clara supplied. Clara Whitfield. And I'm always careful, magistrate. I've learned to be. They stared at each other for a long moment, predator and prey, though it was increasingly unclear who was which. Finally, Harrow turned on his heel and left his men following. We need to move fast, Elias said once they were gone. He'll be watching us now. But Clara was already thinking ahead. No, let him watch. Let him see us meet with people, gather information. The more paranoid he becomes, the more mistakes he'll make. Over the next 3 days, they played a dangerous game. Clara and Margaret openly visited businesses asking questions about mining laws and tax rates, while Elias worked in the shadows documenting illegal activities and finding witnesses willing to testify. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Harrow's own deputy, a young man named Michael Torres, approached them secretly on their 4th night in town. I know who you really are, he said without preamble. And I know what Harrow really is. I've been keeping records copies of everything, the forged documents he uses, the bribes he pays, the orders that come from Denver. Orders from Worthington? Margaret asked sharply. Torres nodded. Never signed, but always in the same handwriting. Always followed by payments to an account in Denver. I became a deputy to uphold the law, not to enforce tyranny. Tell me what you need. With Torres's help, they built an ironclad case against Harrow. But more importantly, they found the connecting thread to Worthington, a pattern of payments and communications that linked the corrupt magistrate directly to the territorial Supreme Court judge. The night they planned to expose Harrow, everything went wrong. Clara had just finished addressing a secret gathering of 30 townspeople in Ellen Morrison's barn when the doors burst open. Harrow stood there with a dozen armed men, his cold smile triumphant. Sedition, he announced loudly. Conspiracy against lawful authority. You're all under arrest. But before his men could move, Deputy Torres appeared behind them with twice as many Millbrook citizens all armed already. Actually, magistrate, you're under arrest for corruption, murder, and impersonating a legitimate official. The standoff was tense, weapons drawn on both sides. Claire could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into bloodshed. She stepped forward, hands visible and empty. Magistrate Harrow, or whoever you really are, you have a choice. Surrender now and face trial, or resist and face the consequences. But look around you. The town is already chosen. More people emerge from the shadows, miners coming off shift shopkeepers who'd closed early mothers who'd left their children with neighbors. They didn't all have guns, but they had tools, determination, and sheer numbers. Harrow's hired guns began to lower their weapons, recognizing the futility of fighting an entire town. But Harrow himself pulled a derringer from his vest, pointing it directly at Clara. "You," he snarled. "This is all you're doing. Worthington warned me about you, said you were a disease spreading across the territory." "The only disease is corruption," Clara replied steadily, though her heart was pounding. "And we're the cure." The shot came from behind Harrow. Not fatal, but enough to send the derringer flying from his hand. Elias stood in the doorway, his smoking gun still trained on the magistrate. "Nobody threatens her," Elias said quietly, but his voice carried absolute conviction. "Not anymore." Harrow was taken into custody, and by morning the telegraph wires were burning with the news. Another of Worthington's puppets had fallen, and this time there was documented evidence linking him directly to the territorial Supreme Court judge. Margaret spent hours transcribing Torres's records, creating copies to send to federal authorities, newspapers, and other towns. "Charles will know now," she said as she worked. "He'll know we're coming for him." "Good," Clara said firmly. "Let him know. Let him feel what all his victims felt, the helplessness of watching justice approach, unable to stop it." They stayed in Millbrook another week, helping establish a temporary government and ensuring the transition was smooth. Ellen Morrison was elected interim mayor, the first woman to hold such a position in the territory. Deputy Torres became sheriff, his integrity proven by his willingness to stand against corruption despite the personal risk. The night before they left, the town held a celebration in the square. It wasn't as subdued as Red Rock's gathering had been. Millbrook had a different character, louder and more boisterous. Miners sang songs, children played freely for the first time in years, and the atmosphere was one of genuine liberation. Ellen pulled Clara aside during the festivities. "You've given us back our town, our lives. How can we ever repay you?" "By keeping it," Clara said simply. "By never letting fear silence you again, and by helping the next town that needs it." "There's something else," Ellen said, lowering her voice. Torres intercepted a message meant for Harrow. "Worthington is calling all his placed officials to Denver for an emergency meeting. He's planning something." Clara found Elias and Margaret immediately sharing the intelligence. They huddled in a corner of the square planning their next move. "It's a trap," Elias said immediately. "He's trying to draw us to Denver onto his territory." "Or he's panicking," Margaret suggested, "pulling his resources together for a final stand." "Either way, we need to be there," Clara said. "This is our chance to expose the entire network at once." "Clara, Denver isn't some frontier town," Elias warned. "It's a city with real police, real courts, all potentially under Worthington's influence. We'd be walking into the lion's den." "Then we'd better bring more lions," Clara replied. Over the next 2 days, they sent messages to every town they knew had suffered under Worthington's network. Red Rock, Millbrook, and 3 other communities Torres had identified from the records. The message was simple. Come to Denver. Bring witnesses. Bring evidence. It's time to end this. The journey to Denver took 5 days through increasingly difficult terrain. Winter was approaching, and the mountain passes were already dusted with snow. They traveled with a group from Millbrook, including Ellen and Torres, who insisted on being part of the final confrontation. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Margaret shared more of her story. "After Henry left me for dead, I spent months recovering not just physically, but mentally. I was so ashamed, so broken. But then I started investigating following the money trails he'd left behind. That's when I discovered Charles's network." "Why didn't you go to the authorities then?" Torres asked. Margaret laughed bitterly. "Which authorities? Charles had judges, marshals, and politicians in his pocket. Going to them would have been signing my death warrant." "So what changed?" Clara asked. "You did," Margaret said simply. "When I heard about Red Rock, about a seamstress who stood on a gallows and forgave her would-be executioners, who then helped her town find redemption, I realized I'd been going about this wrong. Change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from people standing up one by one until there are too many to silence." They reached Denver as the first real snow of winter began to fall. the city sprawling before them like a promise and a threat. It was indeed different from the frontier town's buildings of brick and stone streets lit by gas lamps, and a bustling energy that spoke of commerce and growth. But underneath the prosperity, Clara could sense the rot. Too many well-dressed men with suspicious bulges under their coats. Too many conversations that stopped when strangers passed. Too many eyes that watched without seeming to. They took rooms at a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who asked no questions and offered hot soup regardless of the hour. It was there that they reunited with Sheriff Colton and a delegation from Red Rock, including Tom Bailey and several town council members. "Half the town wanted to come," Colton told Clara. "We had to draw lots to see who would make the journey." "Any word from the other towns?" Elias asked. "Silver Creek sent witnesses. Prosperity Ridge, too. We're not alone in this." Over the next 2 days, their alliance grew. People arrived from communities across the territory, each with stories of corruption, each with evidence of Worthington's network. By the time they were ready to move, they had nearly 100 witnesses and enough documentation to fill several crates. The plan was ambitious but necessary. They would present their evidence simultaneously to the federal marshal's office, the territorial governor, and most importantly, the press. Several journalists had already expressed interest smelling a story that could make their careers. But Worthington struck first. Clara woke on their third night in Denver to find Elias shaking her shoulder urgently. "Get dressed. Now. They're coming." She could hear it then, boots on stairs too many to be innocent. They gathered their most crucial documents and escaped through the window just as the door to their room was kicked in. From the roof of the adjacent building, they watched as men in police uniforms ransacked their rooms. "Local police," Elias muttered. "Worthington's using official channels." They regrouped at a Catholic mission on the edge of town where a sympathetic priest offered sanctuary. Half their people had been arrested on various trumped-up charges, though thankfully the evidence had been dispersed enough that no single raid could destroy it all. "We need to change tactics," Clara said as they huddled in the mission's basement. "Worthington expects us to play by the rules, to go through proper channels. But he controls those channels." "What are you suggesting?" Margaret asked. "Something he won't expect. Something public, undeniable, impossible to suppress." The next morning was Sunday, and the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception was packed for morning mass. Denver's elite filled the front pews, including several judges, the mayor, and sitting in a place of honor, Charles Worthington himself. He was exactly as Clara had imagined, distinguished, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man absolutely certain of his place in the world. He sang the hymns with apparent devotion, the picture of respectability. The service was nearly over when Clara stood up from her place in the back. She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind her came Margaret, then Elias, then dozens of others victims of Worthington's network from across the territory. "Stop," the priest said uncertainly. "What is the meaning of this?" Clara reached the front of the cathedral and turned to face the congregation. She pulled down her collar, revealing her scars to the shocked assembly. "My name is Clara Whitfield," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. 2 years ago, I stood on a gallows in Red Rock, condemned to die for a crime I didn't commit. The man who condemned me was placed in power by that man." She pointed directly at Worthington. "Charles Worthington, who sits among you pretending to be righteous while he spreads corruption across our territory." The cathedral erupted in shocked murmurs. Worthington stood, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. This is a house of God." "Yeah," Clara agreed, "and in God's house the truth must be spoken." Margaret Donovan stepped forward, holding Henry Blackwell's journal. "Charles Worthington created my husband's false identity. He placed him in Red Rock to rob and terrorize its citizens. When Henry was caught, Charles abandoned him, but Henry documented everything." She began to read, her clear voice reciting dates, amounts, and crimes. With each revelation, more witnesses stepped forward. Ellen Morrison told of her husband's murder in Millbrook. A rancher from Silver Creek described losing his land to forged documents. A widow from Prosperity Ridge wept as she recounted her son's death in a rigged trial. "Lies," Worthington shouted. "These people are criminals, conspirators." "Then let's ask someone you can't dismiss so easily," Clara said. She nodded to the back of the cathedral, where Deputy Torres entered with several federal marshals, including Chief Marshal Ruth Hawkins. Charles Worthington. Marshal Hawkins announced, "You're under arrest for conspiracy fraud and corruption of federal officials." Worthington tried to run, but the very respectability he'd cultivated trapped him. The prominent citizens who'd been sitting beside him moments before now blocked his path, not willing to be seen helping an exposed criminal. "You can't do this," he snarled as the marshals cuffed him. "I have friends' influence." "You had those things," Clara corrected. "But influence built on lies crumbles when the truth comes out." As Worthington was led away, the cathedral remained silent for a long moment. Then someone began to clap a single person at first, then another, then dozens. It wasn't celebration exactly. More recognition of courage of justice finally served. Outside the cathedral, snow was falling heavily, blanketing Denver in white. Clara stood on the steps watching as Worthington was loaded into a prison wagon, much like the one that had taken Henry Blackwell. "It's over," Margaret said, beside her tears streaming down her face. "It's really over." "This part is," Clara agreed, "but there are other Worthingtons out there, other networks of corruption. The work is never really done." Elias appeared at her other side, his presence solid and comforting. "But today's work is done and done well. You brought down an entire criminal network, Clara. You gave justice to dozens of communities." "We did it," Clara corrected, "all of us together." The trials that followed were sensation covered by newspapers across the country. Worthington's network unraveled completely, with corrupt officials falling like dominoes across the territory. Some fled, some surrendered, but all were exposed. Clara testified for 3 days, her scars visible to the court. Her voice steady as she recounted not just her own story, but the pattern of systematic corruption Worthington had orchestrated. Margaret's testimony and Blackwell's journals provided the documentation. The witnesses from various towns provided the human cost. Worthington was convicted on all charges, sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. As he was led away, he passed Clara in the courthouse hallway. "You've destroyed everything I built," he said bitterly. "No," Clara replied calmly. "I helped build something better in its place." With the trials concluded, the delegation from Red Rock prepared to return home. But first, there was a celebration at the Brown Palace Hotel, hosted by the grateful citizens of Denver who had discovered corruption in their own midst thanks to the investigation. Clara felt out of place in the grand ballroom among the crystal chandeliers and elegant gowns. She was still at heart a frontier seamstress who had accidentally become a symbol of justice. But when the governor himself asked her to speak, she couldn't refuse. "Fear is the enemy of justice," she told the assembled crowd. "When we let fear silence us, corruption thrives. But when we stand together, when we refuse to be intimidated, even the most powerful criminals can be brought down. What happened in Red Rock and Millbrook and Denver, it can happen anywhere people have the courage to say enough." The applause was thunderous, but Clara barely heard it. Her eyes had found Elias in the crowd, and the look they shared said more than any words could. Later that evening, they walked together through the snowy streets of Denver. The city felt cleaner somehow, as if exposing the corruption had washed it fresh. "What will you do now?" Elias asked. "You're famous, you know. Newspapers are calling you the seamstress of justice. You could have any position you want, governor's aide, federal marshal, anything." Clara laughed at the absurdity of it. "I'm a seamstress. That's what I've always been, what I'll always be. I'm going home to Red Rock, to my shop, to my life. Just like that. After everything. Because of everything," Clara corrected. "I've learned that ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary courage, that's what really changes the world. I don't need a title or position. I just need to keep being who I am where I am." Elias stopped walking, turning to face her in the lamplight. "And what if someone wanted to be there with you? Not just passing through, but staying—" Clara's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you asking—" "I've been chasing criminals for 10 years, Elias said. "Maybe it's time I stopped chasing and started building. Red Rock needs a permanent marshal, someone to train deputies, establish real law enforcement. Sheriff Colton asked me to consider it." "And what did you tell him?" "That I needed to ask the town's conscience first." He took her hands, his touch warm despite the cold. Clara Whitfield, would you mind if I stayed? Instead of answering with words, Clara kissed him. It was their first kiss there in the snowing Denver street with the gas lamps creating halos in the falling snow. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. I'll take that as a no, you wouldn't mind, Elias said. Take it as a yes to everything, Clara replied. The journey home to Red Rock took longer than the journey out, partly due to the weather, but mostly because no one was in a hurry. The mission was accomplished, the enemy defeated, and for the first time in years there was no urgent threat driving them forward. Margaret Donovan traveled with them as far as the railroad junction, where she would catch a train back east. She had decided to use her inheritance, Henry's money now rightfully hers, to establish a foundation helping women escape abusive situations. You saved me, she told Clara at their parting. Not just from Charles and Henry, but from my own fear and shame. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to pay that forward. Just remember, Clara said, embracing her courage is contagious. Every woman you help will help another. That's how change really happens. As Red Rock appeared on the horizon, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, pure, uncomplicated joy. The town looked exactly the same, yet everything was different. She was different. The entire town turned out to welcome them home. The celebration lasted well into the night with stories told and retold, each growing slightly in the telling. But Clara noticed something more important than the celebration, the ease in people's faces, the absence of fear that had haunted them for so long. Sarah Mitchell had kept the seamstress shop running perfectly, even expanding the services to include a small library where women could borrow books. I hope you don't mind, she said anxiously, but literacy and needlework seem to go together somehow. It's perfect, Clara assured her. In fact, I want you to stay on as a full partner. The shop is big enough for both of us, and the work is certainly plentiful enough. Over the following weeks, Red Rock settled into its new normal. Elias officially accepted the position of town marshal, establishing a proper office and beginning to train deputies. His presence brought a sense of security that went beyond just law enforcement. It was the knowledge that someone incorruptible was watching over them. Claire returned to her needlework, but her role had evolved beyond simple seamstress. People came to her for advice, for mediation, for the kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving the worst and choosing to become better rather than bitter. Her shop became even more of a community center where important discussions happened over the sound of sewing machines. One evening, 3 months after their return, Clara was working late on a wedding dress for one of the town's young women when Elias appeared in her doorway. Still working? He asked. Wedding's tomorrow, Clara explained. Martha deserves a perfect dress for her perfect day. Elias entered and sat in the chair where customers usually waited. Do you ever think about it, marriage? Clara's needle paused for just a moment before continuing. I think about a lot of things. Marriage, family, the future. But I also think about independence, about the work still to be done, about not losing myself in someone else's life. What if you didn't have to lose yourself? Elias asked. What if marriage could be a partnership, two people standing together but still themselves? Clara set down her sewing and looked at him directly. Elias Kane, are you proposing? I'm proposing we think about it, he said with a smile. We've been through hell together, fought corruption, brought down criminals. Maybe we should see how we handle ordinary life together before making any grand declarations. Practical? Clara said, returning to her sewing. I like practical. But she was smiling, and Elias saw it. A year passed. Red Rock grew and prospered, becoming a model for other frontier towns. The garden where the gallows had stood was now lush and full, with a small monument erected to commemorate not the near execution, but the town's redemption. The inscription read simply, Where fear once ruled, courage bloomed. Clara and Elias were married in that garden on a spring morning with the entire town in attendance. Sheriff Colton performed the ceremony, having gotten himself certified for the occasion. Sarah Mitchell was maid of honor, and Tom Bailey stood as Elias's best man. You know, Elias said as they exchanged rings, most couples promise to stay together until death do them part. We're starting after death already tried to part us. Then we're ahead of the game, Clara replied. The reception was held in the town square with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family. The Chang family's eldest daughter played violin, a skill she'd been too afraid to share during the dark years. Children ran between the tables, their laughter a sound that would have been unthinkable under Blackwell's rule. As the sun set, Clara stood with her new husband looking out at their town, their people, their home. "No regrets?" Elias asked. "How could I regret any of it?" Clara replied. "Every terrible thing that happened led us here to this moment, to this life. I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the gallows." Clara touched her neck where the scars had faded to thin white lines barely visible unless you knew to look. "Especially not the gallows. That's where Clara the seamstress died, and Clara the fighter was born. Without that moment, none of this would exist.